Daniel Brooks always believed love could survive anything. When he married Clara Whitmore, he truly thought feelings were stronger than money, stronger than fear, stronger than pride. In the early days, their life felt light and full of promise. They met in a crowded bookstore cafe where Daniel had spilled coffee on his own notebook while trying to sketch a building design. Clara had laughed, handed him tissues, and teased him about being a messy genius. He liked her confidence. She liked his passion. He told her he would build houses, one-day-real homes for real families. She told him she wanted beauty in her life, not just walls and ceilings, but warmth and meaning. They talked for hours that first day. By the end of the week, they were walking through the city together as if they had known each other for years. They were young, hopeful, and certain that love would carry them forward. They married in a small ceremony with simple flowers and borrowed decorations. Daniel could not afford much, but he poured his heart into everything. He wrote his own vows. He promised Clara that even if he had nothing else, he would always give her honesty and effort. Clara looked at him with shining eyes and said she would stand beside him in every season. In that moment, they both meant it. They moved into a small apartment with thin walls and old wooden floors that creaked at night. The kitchen was tiny. The bedroom barely fit their bed, but they filled the space with laughter. They cooked cheap meals together. They danced in the living room to music from Daniel's old speakers. They made plans for the future. Big plans, bold plans. Daniel would grow his construction business. Clara would rise in her design firm. They would buy a house with wide windows and sunlight in every corner. They believed time was on their side. The first year passed quickly. Daniel worked long hours trying to build his company from nothing. He took small projects renovating kitchens, repairing roofs, painting offices. Some clients paid late, some argued about costs. Daniel learned to negotiate, to stay calm, to keep going. Clara supported him at first. She would bring him coffee at night and sit beside him while he reviewed contracts. She told her friends proudly that her husband was building his own company. When money was tight, they told themselves it was temporary. They believed struggle was part of the journey. But the second year was harder. A large project Daniel had counted on fell through. The client chose a bigger company at the last minute. Daniel had already spent weeks preparing plans. That loss hurt more than he expected. Bills began to stack on the kitchen table. Rent increased. Clara's job became more demanding. She started staying late at the office, working on projects for wealthy clients who spoke about beach houses and overseas vacations. She came home tired, her heels in her hand, her face tense. Daniel would greet her with a hopeful smile, but she often brushed past him quietly. The space between them began to grow, not loud at first, just quiet. Arguments started small. Clara would ask about money. Daniel would say he was handling it. She would suggest he look for a stable job with a steady salary. He would shake his head and say he needed to believe in his dream. She did not understand why belief did not bring results faster. He did not understand why she could not be patient. They both felt misunderstood, but neither knew how to say it without sounding accusing. Nights that once ended in laughter now ended in silence. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Clara's steady breathing, wondering how something so strong could feel so fragile. One evening, Clara came home from a company dinner. She wore a new dress Daniel had not seen before. It was elegant and simple, but it spoke of a world he did not belong to. He seemed distant as she placed her purse on the table. Daniel tried to ask about her evening, but her answers were short. Finally, she sighed and said, "Do you know what it feels like to sit at a table where everyone talks about investments and houses and vacations, and I have nothing to say?" Daniel felt the weight in her voice. He said softly, "We will have those things one day." Clara looked at him with tired eyes. "When, Daniel?" she asked. He had no answer that could satisfy her. The pressure continued to build. Clara's coworkers began inviting her to events where successful couples mingled and shared stories of quick success. She listened to them and wondered why her life felt stuck. She compared her apartment to their houses. She compared Daniel's uncertain income to their steady wealth. Comparison slowly poisoned her gratitude. She stopped talking about Daniel proudly. Instead, she avoided the topic. Daniel noticed the change in her tone when she introduced him to others. It hurt, but he pretended not to see it. Then came the night that changed everything. Rain tapped against the apartment windows. The power had flickered earlier and the room felt cold. Daniel sat at the small kitchen table reviewing numbers that refused to add up. Clara stood by the window, arms crossed, staring into the dark street below. The air between them felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Without turning around, Clara said, "I can't keep living like this." Daniel looked up slowly. He knew what she meant, but he hoped he was wrong. "Like what?" he asked carefully. She turned then, her eyes bright, not with anger, but with exhaustion, with fear, with uncertainty, with nothing. The word hung in the air. Daniel felt a sharp pain in his chest. "We don't have nothing," he said quietly. "We have each other." Clara's lips trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "That's not enough for me anymore." The honesty of her words cut deeper than any insult. She walked toward the table and placed a stack of papers in front of him. He stared at them, confused. Divorce documents. She had already signed her name. Daniel's mind struggled to understand how things had moved so far without him noticing. "You decided this alone?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Clara shook her head slowly. "I decided this after months of thinking. I can't wait for a dream that may never come true." Daniel stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "So you're leaving because I don't make enough money?" he asked. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. "I'm leaving because I need stability. I need security. I need to feel safe." He stepped closer, searching her face for the woman who once promised forever. "And I don't make you feel safe." She looked at him, and for a second doubt flickered in her eyes. But fear was stronger. "Not financially," she whispered. The words felt cold and sharp. He wanted to argue, to promise bigger contracts, faster growth, immediate success. But he knew promises without proof meant nothing now. Instead, he said softly, "I love you." Clara's expression softened, and tears filled her eyes. "I know," she replied, "but love doesn't fix everything." The silence that followed felt final. Daniel realized he was watching the end of something he had once believed was unbreakable. The next days passed in a blur. Clara packed her clothes, her books, her framed photos. Daniel helped without speaking much. Every object she placed in a box felt like another piece of their story being erased. The apartment looked emptier with each hour. On the last morning, Clara stood by the door holding her suitcase. She glanced around the small living room where they had once danced and laughed. For a brief second, she seemed unsure. Daniel saw that hesitation and almost reached for her hand. But she straightened her shoulders instead. "Hope you understand." "One day," she said softly. Daniel nodded, though he did not. He watched as she stepped into the hallway. The door closed with a quiet click, and the sound echoed louder than any slam. Daniel stood alone in the silence. The apartment felt colder than before. He walked to the kitchen table where the divorce papers still lay. He traced his finger over Clara's signature. He wondered how love had turned into a calculation of income and security. He wondered if he had been foolish to believe dreams mattered more than comfort. But even in his pain, a small voice inside him refused to die. It whispered that he was not worthless. That struggle did not define his future. Still that night, as he lay in their empty bed, he felt the weight of loss pressing down on him. He had given Clara his heart when he had nothing else to offer. Now he truly had nothing, no wife, no certainty, no reassurance. Across the city, Clara unpacked her belongings in a new apartment closer to her office. The place was modern and bright. The furniture was elegant. From the balcony, she could see tall buildings shining under city lights. It was the kind of place she once dreamed of living in. Yet, as she stood alone in the quiet room, she felt an unexpected ache in her chest. She told herself she had made the practical choice, the smart choice. She repeated that stability mattered. She tried not to think about Daniel sitting alone in their old apartment. She tried not to remember the way he used to look at her as if she were his entire world. Daniel did not sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling and listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. For the first time, he questioned whether love truly conquered all. But beneath the doubt, beneath the heartbreak, something stronger began to form. A quiet determination. The world measured his worth by money. He would prove he could succeed. Not for Clara, not to win her back, but because he refused to let her final word about him be nothing. And as the first light of morning slipped through the thin curtains, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would rise no matter how long it took. The morning after Clara walked out, Daniel Brooks did not cry. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank space in the closet where her clothes had once been. The apartment felt hollow, but inside him something else was happening. The pain was sharp, but it was clean. There were no more arguments waiting to explode. No more tense dinners. No more silent comparisons. Just truth. She had left because he had nothing. That sentence echoed in his mind, not as an insult, but as a challenge. The first weeks were brutal. Clients delayed payments. One contractor quit without warning. Daniel had to sell his old motorcycle to cover rent and keep the company registered. He ate simple meals and worked from dawn until late night. When exhaustion hit, he remembered Clara's words, "I need stability," instead of breaking him. The memory pushed him forward. Stopped chasing large, risky projects and focused on smaller jobs he could complete perfectly. He became known for finishing on time, for being honest about costs, for fixing mistakes without excuses. Slowly, people began recommending him. 3 months later, he landed a mid-sized renovation contract for a small office building. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to breathe again. Daniel managed every detail himself. He supervised workers during the day and reviewed plans at night. He barely noticed how tired he was. When the project finished, the owner shook his hand and said, "You're reliable. That matters more than size." That sentence stayed with him. Reliable, not flashy, not rich, but solid. Meanwhile, Clara stepped deeper into a different world. At her design firm, she worked closely with a senior executive named Victor Hale. Victor was confident, polished, and always composed. He drove a luxury car and spoke about investments like they were casual hobbies. He admired Clara's taste and ambition. He listened when she talked about wanting more from life. Slowly, dinners. After work turned into private conversations. He offered stability without hesitation. A year after her divorce, Clara married him in a ceremony far grander than her first. The photos were perfect. The smiles looked real. Daniel saw one of those photos online by accident. For a moment, his chest tightened. But instead of anger, he felt clarity. She had chosen certainty over struggle. That was her choice. He closed the browser and returned to his work. Over the next year, Daniel's company grew steadily. He hired 2 permanent workers, then he rented a small warehouse for tools and materials. He stopped thinking like a man trying to survive and started thinking like a man building something lasting. He studied business strategy in the evenings. He learned about contracts, taxes, marketing. He networked carefully, not desperately. He became calmer in meetings. His voice grew firm. People began to notice his confidence. One evening, at a local builders conference, Daniel met an investor named Marcus Reed. Marcus was older, sharp-eyed, and quiet. He had built and sold several companies over decades. During a discussion panel, Daniel asked a direct question about scaling without losing quality. Marcus approached him afterward. Most young builders chase fast money, Marcus said. You sound like you're thinking long term. They spoke for an hour. Daniel explained his vision affordable housing projects done with integrity. Marcus listened carefully. Weeks later, Marcus visited one of Daniel's construction sites unannounced. He watched how Daniel spoke to workers with respect but authority. He saw how organized the site was. Afterward, they sat on wooden beams. Under the open sky, Marcus made an offer. A partnership. Capital in exchange for expansion. Daniel's heart pounded. The offer was real, but so was the risk. He spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing numbers. Finally, he signed. That decision changed everything. Within a year, Daniel Construction expanded into neighboring cities. They took on larger projects, apartment complexes, commercial spaces. Daniel no longer carried tools daily, but he visited every site. He never forgot what it felt like to struggle. His name began appearing in local business magazines. Interviews followed. When asked about his journey, he spoke simply. Consistency matters more than luck. 2 years after Clara left, Daniel bought a house. Not a mansion, not flashy. Spacious, bright, and built with his own company's hands. As he walked through the empty rooms before moving in, he remembered the promise he once made about wide windows and sunlight. The thought did not hurt anymore. It felt distant, like a chapter from another life. Clara's life, however, was not as golden as it seemed. Victor provided luxury without hesitation, designer clothes, expensive vacations, a penthouse apartment with a skyline view. But Victor also believed control was part of security. He questioned her spending even when it was minor. He preferred she reduce her working hours. You don't need the stress, he would say smoothly. Slowly, Clara felt her independence shrinking. Stability came with invisible strings. They rarely laughed the way she and Daniel once had. Conversations with Victor were practical, strategic, polished. He respected her, but warmth was scarce. When disagreements happened, Victor did not shout. He withdrew. Cold silence replaced argument. Clara began to understand that comfort without connection could feel lonely. One evening, at a high-profile business gala, their worlds collided again. Daniel attended as a sponsor for a new development project. He wore a tailored suit, simple but sharp. He moved through the room confidently, shaking hands, discussing plans. Across the hall, Clara stood beside Victor, greeting guests. When she saw Daniel, her breath caught. He looked different, just in appearance, but in presence. He stood straight. His eyes were steady. There was no trace of the uncertain man she had left behind. Victor noticed her pause. "Do you know him?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Yes, we were married." Victor's eyebrow lifted slightly, but he said nothing more. Later, Daniel and Clara found themselves standing near the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly below. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Clara said, "You've done well." Her voice carried more than politeness. Daniel nodded. "I kept working." She studied him carefully. "I always knew you were determined," she said. He smiled faintly. "Determination is easier when you have nothing left to lose." The words landed softly, but heavily. Victor joined them shortly after. His handshake with Daniel was firm but distant. There was an unspoken comparison in his eyes. Money against resilience, stability against growth. Clara felt caught between 2 versions of her life. That night, long after the gala ended, Clara lay awake beside Victor. The ceiling above her was high and elegant, but her thoughts were restless. She remembered the small apartment with creaky floors. She remembered dancing barefoot in the living room. She remembered Daniel's unwavering belief in tomorrow. The first time doubt slipped past her defenses. Had she mistaken temporary struggle for permanent failure? Daniel, on the other hand, returned to his quiet house alone. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by his own wide window. Seeing Clara again stirred memories, but they no longer controlled him. He realized something important at that gala. He had once wanted success to prove her wrong. Now he wanted success because it reflected who he had become. The difference felt powerful over the following months. Daniel secured the biggest contract of his career, multi-building housing project funded partly by Marcus. The deal placed his company among major players in the industry. Media attention grew. Interviews turned into features. His story from struggle to success circulated widely. Clara saw one of those articles during a lunch break. She read every word slowly. He had never mentioned her, not once. That silence affected her more than blame would have. Victor's behavior grew more rigid. He disliked how often Daniel's name appeared in conversations among mutual business contacts. "Your past should stay in the past," he told Clara one evening. The comment felt less like advice and more like warning. For the first time, Clara felt small in a marriage built on size. Daniel continued moving forward. He invested carefully. He mentored young builders, donated to community housing programs. Success did not make him loud. It made him grounded. And yet, sometimes, late at night, he wondered whether Clara ever thought about what they once had. Not because he wanted her back, but because part of him still carried the memory of their early love. One afternoon, his assistant informed him that Victor Hale's firm had withdrawn from a joint project due to internal restructuring. Rumors spread about financial strain behind the polished image. Daniel did not react publicly. He focused on his own path. Clara's marriage began cracking quietly. Arguments surfaced more often. Victor accused her of distraction. She accused him of control. The penthouse felt colder each week. Stability, she realized, could feel like a cage. And while Daniel stood stronger than ever, unaware of the full storm brewing in her life. Clara found herself standing at her balcony one evening, staring at the city lights, whispering a question into the wind. What if she had stayed? The answer did not come immediately, but the weight of that question began shaping her next move.